Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series where we take a look at Precon decks and bring them up to cut rate standards. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at the Riders of Rohan Precon from the Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth and its face commander, Eowyn Shieldmaiden, which we'll be bringing up from its roughly $40 price point to an increased budget of $75 after upgrades. But before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. And if you're feeling particularly generous, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description to keep me caffeinated as I work on more of these builds. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see which Precon upgrade we'll be covering next. So with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Eowyn Shieldmaiden is a 5/4 human knight with first strike that costs 2, a blue, a red, and a white, and has the following ability. At the beginning of combat on our turn, if another human entered the battlefield under our control that turn, we create 2 2/2 red human knight creature tokens with trample and haste. Then, if we control 6+ humans, we draw a card. Breaking down her core stats, Eowyn is sporting a midweight CMC, an average power but slightly below average toughness for her cost, which is made up for by her built-in first strike to more easily survive combat, and an ability that cares about humans coming into play to create even more humans and eventually generate us card advantage. Taking a closer look at the first part of her ability, it simply generates us an additional 4/4 worth of stats across 2 bodies with built-in trample and haste on each of our combats so long as we have a human enter play beforehand, which is very easy to proc by either casting a human creature spell or creating a human token on our main one, and it provides us with a repeatable way to increase our board presence with tribe members that we can immediately use to swing in with and reliably get in for damage thanks to their built-in keywords. This then leads nicely into the second part of her ability, in which after Eowyn creates her tokens, we get to draw a card if we have 6+ humans in play, which synergizes perfectly with her token creation and provides the build with a steady stream of card advantage that rewards us for enabling our commander and building up our board with tribal bodies as often as possible. So, as we can see based on her abilities, Eowyn is clearly a human tribal commander, aiming to take advantage of us getting humans onto the battlefield to generate us even more tribal bodies as well as card advantage. And the deck out of the box supports this playstyle very well, including plenty of humans and sources of human token creation to ensure we can get tribal bodies into play reliably each turn to proc our commander, various human tribal payoffs that empower our wide boards and allow them to hit even harder, and even supporting our commander's card advantage generation through a human-flavored monarch sub-theme that not only nets us additional cards per turn, but also provides additional support to our go-wide game plan by empowering our board even further and/or generating even more token creation. That said, while the core build is certainly well put together and synergistic, there are some improvements that can be made to make it even better, such as increasing the core build's relatively low number of ramp sources with both on-theme and generic ramp sources to ensure we can get to our commander and other high CMC spells in a timely manner, replacing non-humans and non-synergistic humans with additional sources of human token creation and ways to empower our wide tribal board states even further, and then just making some quality of life improvements to the build's other core stats to help enhance the deck's overall performance, thereby allowing the Kingdom of Men to overrun their opponents in no time. So let us make our way to Middle-earth and to the Kingdom of Rohan, home to the Masters of Cavalry Combat and to our commander, Eowyn, daughter of Eomund and Theodwyn, younger sister of Eomer and a niece of King Theoden, Shieldmaiden of Rohan, and slayer of the Witch King. From her time caring for her ailing uncle to when she rode alongside him in the Battle of Pelennor Fields, her duty has always been to her family, her kingdom, and its people. That was what drove her to disguise herself as a man to fight in the war against King Theoden's protests, and that was what gave her the resolve to stand and fight against the Witch King, Lord of the Nazgul and Sauron's second-in-command, nearly dying in the process, but slaying him and turning the tide of the war. And while her days of battle have come to an end, she has etched her mark in Middle-earth's history as the White Lady of Rohan, whose heroic actions not only saved her kingdom, but the entire realm. So, now that we have a better understanding of the commander and playstyle, let's take a look at the cards we'll be keeping from the base build. Starting off with the creatures that made the grade from the core build, we'll begin by retaining the best human token generators the base build provides us with to ensure that Eowyn can reliably proc her ability every turn, and that we can continue growing our board state, such as Prince Imrahil the Fair, whose token production linked to draw synergizes nicely with both our commander and our monarch triggers to consistently build up our board, Faramir Steward of Gondor, who allows us to become the monarch when Eowyn or any of our other CMC 4+ legends come down, then continues to build up our board every turn if we can hold on to or retake the crown, Riders of Rohan, which give us 8/8 worth of stats across 3 bodies when they come down, and give us the option to dash them into play so we can swing in with them immediately, then return them to our hand so we can cast them again on subsequent turns and reproc all our human ETB triggers, and Losaranch Captain, who not only creates a tribal token on our upkeep, immediately fulfilling our commander's ability trigger while doing so, but also weaponizes our humans by turning them into tap down, generally tapping down at least 3 bodies a turn thanks to her and our commander's human token creation to create massive holes in our opponent's defenses so that our creatures can get through. Then from there, we'll also be holding on to the majority of the base build's tribal AoE pump effects and tribal buff effects to make our boards even deadlier, like Theoden King of Rohan, who alongside our commander can give upwards of 3+ humans double strike per turn as our tribe members enter play to increase our damage output, Erkenbrand Lord of Westfold, who provides all our humans with an offensive power boost for every human we bring into play to increase their damage output even further, and Baragon of the Guard, who instead increases our humans' power and toughness for every human that ETBs under our control, and grants them vigilance on top of that so we can intercept any incoming crackback after we swing in with their empowered stat blocks. Aragorn King of Gondor will then also be staying in under this category, who may not be a tribal payoff per se, but still serves as another means for us to become the monarch when he comes down to provide additional card advantage, and, if we're able to hold on to the crown, prevents our entire board from being blocked to enable devastating alpha strikes. Then with our Go Wide human game plan support pieces covered, we'll move on to our retained on-theme and generically good humans that help pad our core stats to improve the build's consistency, starting with the card advantage sources like Weathered Wayfarer, which cheaply tutors up lands for us to ensure we make our land drops if we're behind on lands, which is usually the case considering we don't have a lot of access to land-based ramp in our colors, Verge Rangers, whose land sight further increases our deck's ability to make our land drops each turn off the top of our deck, and gives us the chance to do so both before and after the draw our commander provides to maximize the chances of us hitting a land, Champions of Minas Tirith, which makes us the monarch and also makes it very difficult for our opponents to attack into us to take the crown away unless they're very low on cards in hand or spend a lot of mana to do so, and Boromir Gondor's Hope, who provides ETB and on-attack tribe and artifact digging to further enable and empower our game plan. It's then on to our kept-in tribe spot removal that helps us keep the board clear of threats, which includes Denethor Stoneseer, whose ETB scry and low CMC makes him a great early drop to increase our human count and smooth out our draws, and later we can use to fling some damage to creatures or face while simultaneously making us the monarch, Fiend Hunter, whose O-Ring-like effect on a tribal body helps us deal with otherwise resilient creatures while proccing and benefiting from our tribal payoffs, and Eomer King of Rohan, who serves as a tribal payoff that comes in as a massive double-striking beatstick on established board states that also doubles as removal with his ETB damage effect that scales off of his power, and that's on top of being yet another way for us to become the monarch to generate even more card advantage. Then closing in on the end of our held over creature base, we'll be hanging on to a handful of ways to keep our board state intact as we swing in with it or as our opponents attempt to disrupt it, with frontline medic staying in as a way to grant our entire board indestructible as they attack so we don't lose any of our board state as they crack in, Bastion Protector retaining its spot as a way to make our commander indestructible so she can continue growing our board and drawing us cards with impunity, as well as giving her a sizable stat bump so she can hit even harder, and Gilrian Dundane Protector keeping her position as well as both a means to protect our creatures from spot removal or even a wipe if needed with her flicker effect, in the latter's case also granting them some nice keywords as a bonus, as well as a means to trigger Eowyn's effect if we have no other humans that we can bring into play before combat. And lastly, Combat Celebrant will be staying in as our final creature carryover, whose extra combat phase granting is superb at enabling alpha strikes for our wide boards, and who synergizes very well with our commander to get extra token generation and draw off of her ability whenever we use it. Then moving on to our retained instance, only the removal spells Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares made the cut, both of which are dirt cheap sources of non-destruction removal that help us deal with our opponent's creature-based threats very efficiently. Similarly, our sorcery holdovers will also only contain a small number of entries, with 4 Therolingus and Visions of Glory both staying in as mass human token creation to help us build up our board, the former being scalable and allowing us to use the tokens it creates to swing in immediately, while the latter scales with our existing board state and is usable twice per game thanks to Flashback, and a Supreme Verdict keeping its position as well as a relatively cheap board wipe that bypasses spell disruption, which is always nice to have when up against control-heavy builds. Another trio of entries then hang on to their spots as we reach our retained enchantments, with Shared Animosity staying in as a solid tribal payoff that can easily increase our creature's power into the double digits on wide enough board states to enable back-breaking alpha strikes, Court of Ire maintaining its spot as yet another way for us to become the Monarch, as well as generating a free shock around or a free Sundering Strike instead if we're able to hold on to the crown for additional removal and burn, and Oath of Eorl staying in as well as yet another token generator that nets us 6/6 worth of stats over 2 turns to build up our board, along with making Eowyn or any of our other legendary humans indestructible for added resiliency, while again making us the Monarch in the process. Then reaching our artifact carryovers, we'll open with our retained Mana Rock collection consisting of Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Talisman of Conviction, Talisman of Progress, and Thought Vessel, as well as the land ramp source Wayfarer's Bauble, all of which help us cheaply speed up and or fix our mana base so we can get to our commander and other high CMC tribe members as quickly and reliably as possible. We'll then close out our kept artifacts with a trio of tribal payoffs, those being Herald's Horn, which reduces the cost of all our humans and has a solid chance of drawing us an additional 1 each turn thanks to the critical mass of them in our 99, Door of Destinies, which serves as a tribal anthem that grows more and more powerful as we cast more humans to power up our board even further, and Vanquisher's Banner, which is both a tribal anthem and a source of repeatable card advantage as we cast our humans to help keep our hands nice and full. And finally, reaching our land base, we'll start off with our retained mana lands, in which we'll be holding on to Command Tower as a land that taps for all our colors, Secluded Courtyard and Path of Ancestry as a pair of tribal-focused lands that either tap for any of our colors to cast our human spells, or tack on some card selection to them as we cast them, Exotic Orchard as another land that comes into play untapped and can tap for at least a few of our colors off our opponent's lands, the Check lands Clifftop Retreat, Glacial Fortress, and Sulphur Falls, the Reveal lands Fury Calm, Snarl, and Port Town, and the Battle land Prairie Stream, all of which tap for 1 of 2 of our colors and generally come into play untapped thanks to our large number of basics, and the Painland Battlefield Forge, which provides even more fixing to the build for only a bit of life loss if we need to use it. Then for kept utility lands, we'll be hanging on to Rogue's Passage as a means to ensure that our commander or other empowered human can get through for damage on stalled board states, which can be particularly useful when trying to take the Monarch away from a turtling opponent. Windbrisk Kite stays in as an easy-to-meet way to get a heavily discounted spell thanks to our go-wide game plan, and Throne of the High City stays in as well as an instant speed way for us to become the Monarch, which is relevant for a few of our payoffs that care about us being the Monarch on our upkeep. And finally, we'll be keeping the 9 plains, 5 islands, and 5 mountains from the base build as our basics to round out our mana base. That leaves us with a final tally of 70 cards, including basic lands that we'll be keeping from the base build, leaving us with 30 cards to replace. So, now that we've covered all the cards that made the cut from the core build, let's move on to our upgrades. Opening with our creature upgrades, we'll start off by cutting the non-humans in the base build along with some of its less efficient humans in favor of adding additional human token production to further build up our board with tribe members, with Gimli of the Glittering Caves, who would find a better home in a treasure-focused deck, being replaced with Adeline Resplendent Cathar, whose on-attack token production will generally net us 3 extra tribe members per turn to proc and benefit from our payoffs, while she simultaneously becomes more powerful as we continue to grow our board. Grey Host Reinforcements off-tribe Graveyard Hate, losing its spot to Faramir, Prince of Ithilien, who will either net us a card or 3 additional tribal bodies each turn, either of which we're fine with. Flame Rush Riders on attack temporary token creation being benched in favor of Thraben Doomsayer, whose ability to create a tribal token on our main one is invaluable to proc Eowyn's token creation and draw, and whose anthem while we're low on health, while somewhat niche, does force our opponents to either dedicate their resources to finishing us off, or risk one last glorious charge from our board. And Selfless Squire, whose on-damage protection is admittedly nice, but doesn't help our go-wider tribal game plan too much, gets exchanged out for Cemetery Protector, who gives us tribal Graveyard Hate and then creates more human tokens after the fact that takes advantage of our large creature base. Then from there, we'll be adding in some additional ways to power up our wide board of humans even further to ensure they can hit for maximum damage, with Humble Defector and its symmetrical draw being cut for Coppercoat Vanguard, who provides all our humans with an offensive power boost as well as some soft targeted removal protection to make them a bit more resilient. Harsh Mentor's Burn effect being replaced with Thalia's Lieutenant, who permanently empowers all our humans in play with +1/+1 counters when it comes down, then continues to grow itself as more humans ETB. Archivist of Gondor Symmetrical Monarch Focus Draw losing out to the honorary human mirror entity, who we can pump huge amounts of mana into to provide our entire board with an equally large stat increase at instant speed for gigantic alpha strikes. Village Bellringer's one-time AoE untap effect being subbed out for Adriana Captain of the Guard, who will more often than not provide our entire board with a +3/+3 stat bump as we swing in thanks to the AoE melee she provides. And lastly, Marshall's Anthem will be traded out for the Universes Beyond card from another universe, Olga Relentless Rager, whose must-be blocked clause makes her a pseudo-removal option on a well-statted body, and whose AoE power boost allows our army of tokens to crash into well-established boards with impunity, forcing our opponents to either trade their creatures for our tokens that will just replenish on the following turn or take huge amounts of damage, and both in the case of the trampling tokens our commander creates. Additionally, we'll also be slotting in further ways to make our board evasive to take blocking out of the equation entirely, with Taunt from the Ramparts' admittedly solid AoE goad and block prevention being traded out for Keeper of Keys, who edges out his predecessor thanks to proccing and benefiting from our tribal payoffs, granting us the Monarch to draw us cards and proc our Monarch Matters payoffs, and, if we're able to hold on to the crown with our army of tokens, makes our entire board unblockable so we can safely swing in with them. Frontier Warmonger pseudo-evasion granting being sidelined for Audric Master Tactician, who can easily make our wide board states completely unblockable and or force our opponents to make bad blocks to take out creatures that normally would avoid combat, and the lackluster non-human tribal support piece Dearly Departed being sent back to the grave so we can give it spot to Archetype of Imagination, who immediately turns our entire board into flyers while simultaneously shutting off flying for all our opponents' creatures as soon as it hits the table, enabling our board to strike in unimpeded into our opponents, while making it significantly more difficult for our opponents to attack into us with normally evasive creatures. Then with our go-wide human game plan fully supported, we'll pivot to making some in-tribe core stat upgrades to improve performance while staying on theme, in which we'll be replacing the temporary theft effect Zealous Conscripts, the tribal O-Ring Palace Jailer, and the bit too finicky theft effect Fealty to the Realm, with Eowyn Fearless Knight, Cathar Commando, and a Devout Chaplain, all of whom are cheaper than the cards they're replacing to help speed up our mana curve, and provide better removal with upside by either providing temporary protection against her target's colors for both herself and all our other legendary humans, being castable at flash speed to catch our opponents off guard while proccing our payoffs, and weaponizing our large amount of humans to provide repeatable back row destruction respectively. Similarly, we'll be improving our ramp package by cutting the slow fetches Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse to add in the in-tribe ramp sources Knight of the White Orchid and Keeper of the Accord, the former fetching up non-basic planes to further fix our mana base and whose built-in First Strike still makes it good in combat, especially when pumped by our tribal anthems, and the latter providing continual ramp for us so long as we're behind on land drops, which could be very often if anyone at the table's in green. And then as our final upgrade to our creature base, we'll be cutting the AoE protection spell Unbreakable Formation for the in-tribe source of AoE protection, Boromir, Warden of the Tower, who still grants the same indestructibility to our board when necessary, procs and benefits from all our human payoffs, and even acts as a silver bullet against decks that cheat on mana cost to stop them dead in their tracks, which may be niche but is still nice to have access to. Then proceeding to our instant upgrades, the only changes we'll be making will be improving our removal package by cutting the slow and vulnerable Banishing Light, and the much too narrow Lost to Legend for the staple removal spells Chaos Warp and Generous Gift, both of which are superb spot removal that help us combat against any type of permanent threats we may encounter. Following suit, our sorcery upgrades will also refine our core stats by cutting the indiscriminate board wipe Earthquake for the tribal board wipe Raise the Palisade, which still allows us to wipe the board while leaving our entire creature base intact so we can continue to swing in with it. Our enchantment upgrades will then only see a singular change as well, in which we'll be cutting the 2-time mass token generator, increasing devotion, for the continual token production provided by Outlaw's Merriment, which is not only cheaper, but also synergizes better with our commander by creating a human token on our upkeep, reliably proccing her ability every turn even if we have no other ways to get humans into play. Nearly at the end now, our artifact upgrades will mainly consist of further improving the build's ramp package, in which the strange AoE theft effect Call for Aid, the very conditional Sunset Revelry, the decent but ultimately unnecessary Crown of Gondor, and the generic Mana Rock Commander Sphere will all be swapped out for the Mana Rocks Azoria Signet, Boros Signet, Izzet Signet, and Felwar Stone, all of which beef up the build's number of ramp sources to more acceptable numbers so we can cast our commander and other high CMC spells more reliably. And then to wrap up our artifact upgrades, we'll be scrapping the tribal payoff Heirloom Blade to make room for the even better tribal payoff Horn of Gondor, which we can use repeatedly to double the amount of tribal bodies on our board for only 3 mana, and we can use that instant speed on our opponent's turns to grant those tokens pseudo haste so we can swing in with them when the turn gets back to us. And finally, reaching our land upgrades, we'll be cutting the Gainlands Windscarred Crag and Tranquil Cove and replacing them with Unclaimed Territory and Castle Ardenvale, the former of which provides additional fixing for our tribal-focused build, while the latter gives us access to even more tribal token creation from the relative safety of our land slot, and swapping out Field of Ruin for its literal upgrade, Demolition Field, which provides the same land spot removal to deal with problematic utility lands without ramping the rest of the table when we use it. So, now that we've covered all 30 cards that we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. This deck currently has 38 creatures including our commander, 4 instants, 4 sorceries, 4 enchantments, 14 artifacts, 0 planeswalkers, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 38 humans, 18 sources of human tokens, 20 cards that care about humans, 10 anthems and anthem-like effects, both tribal and otherwise, 5 sources of AoE evasion, 5 sources of AoE or single target protection, 10 cards that make us the monarch, and 4 cards that care about us being the monarch, giving us a critical mass of humans to proc our commander, plenty of payoffs for them to generate us additional value, enable them to hit harder or bypass blockers entirely, and a decent monarch sub-theme that helps us keep our hands topped off while providing us with even more value if we're able to hold on to the crown. For general deck stats, we have 13 ramp sources, 17 card draw sources, 12 targeted removal sources, and 2 board wipes, with only our draw being higher than normal since most of it is linked to the Monarch, which we'll be using to generate us value through other means as well. Looking at our mana curve, we have 5 1-drops, 15 2-drops, 18 3-drops, 13 4-drops, 10 5-drops, and 3 6-drops. Leaving us with a mid-weight curve that aims to get a decent amount of humans on board before we cast our commander, preferably on a turn we can cast her and cast or create another human to proc her ability, after which we'll just continue to build up our board with more and more tribal bodies and more ways to empower them until our massive army of humans overwhelms our opponents. The final price of this build then comes out to be $75.11 after upgrades. This price does not include tax or shipping and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was $40. The price of the cards was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For side grades, we can swap out Fiend Hunter for Mass Appeal if we would like to include more tribal draw in the build at the cost of cutting into our removal package. Keeper of the Accord can be traded for Blade Historian if we would rather increase our damage output via its double strike granting over the repeatable ramp its predecessor provides, and Olga Relentless Rager can be sidelined in favor of Mother of Runes if we would like to have a lower mana curve and additional ways to protect our commander instead of more ways to power up our board. Then for additional upgrades, Fiend Hunter can be cut in favor of Lauren of the Third Path, who still provides in-tribe removal and can be used to generate us repeatable card advantage afterwards. Visions of Glory can be replaced with Cathar's Crusade to permanently increase the power of our wide board states via its AoE counter distribution every time one of our humans ETBs. Court of Ire can be axed to make room for Kindred Discovery, which gives us even more tribal draw to help us dig for even more resources. Adriana, Captain of the Guard, can be benched so we can give her spot to Coat of Arms, which empowers our human tribal build with an ever-increasing anthem that scales with the size of our board for even more damage potential. And Denethor Stoneseer can be relieved of his stewardship so we can put Esper Sentinel in his place, who can easily draw us 3 cards per rotation unless our opponents are able to pay the tax it incurs, which will become harder and harder to do once we power it up. And then, for those of us with the deepest pockets, Audric Master Tactician can be retired in favor of Rick Steadfast Leader, who serves as a powerful tribal lord that also distributes useful keywords to our entire board, though it should be noted that his nearly $50 price tag should be coming down at some point once he gets his non-universes beyond printing, so we may want to save our money until that happens. That said, if we're dead set on spending a ridiculous amount of cash, we can replace Keeper of Keys with Sun Quan, Lord of Wu, who provides in-tribe AoE evasion as soon as he comes down, and whose price certainly won't be coming down anytime soon either. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. With the Riders of Rohan Precon upgrade complete, the next deck we'll be covering will be the Elven Council Precon and its face commander, Galadriel Elven Queen, so look forward to an elf-themed build featuring her coming soon. And lastly, before we close out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel can't continue to grow without your support. And if you feel like showing your thanks by keeping me caffeinated while I make these videos, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the cut-rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.